Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, September 24th, 2021, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 2022 gubernatorial races and why the Democratic Party specifically needs to run smart and strong candidates across many of these competitive races. The reason why? Well, when you take a look at the competitive map from 2018, you might notice that many races did come down to the wire. Most notably the state of Florida, which was decided by less than half a percentage point between Governor Ron DeSantis, at the time Representative Ron DeSantis, against Andrew Gillum. Now, the reason why that was so significant is because that race was absolutely winnable by the Democratic Party. Just there wasn't as much energy on the Democratic Party side as they thought in the state of Florida. Both the Senate race and the governor's race could have gone differently had the strategies been slightly different, and it requires a strong candidate in this race. Questions about whether or not Andrew Gillum was the strongest contender for the Democratic Party in that race did come after the election. Of course, hindsight is 2020, but looking at the 2018 governor race, that question is absolutely valid. Looking at the competitive nature of both the Senate and governor elections, considering the overwhelming Democratic year, yes, you can question the strength of these Democratic contenders. But it's not just here that we would see close races in which stronger candidates could end up doing well in 2022. For instance, the state of Georgia is another example in which Brian Kemp only defeated Stacey Abrams by a margin of 1.4%. In Georgia, 2 years prior, Donald Trump had won this state by over 5 percentage points. And fast forward to 2020, Stacey Abrams, combined with the efforts of many other organizers across the state, made Georgia turn blue. Not just Georgia, not just Florida, but also in some states you might not expect, such as Alaska, in which Mike Dunleavy defeated the incumbent governor and Mark Begich, who also used to serve as a senator from the state of Alaska. Now, the incumbent governor here only received 2% of the vote, and I know that may come across as striking, but Bill Walker was originally running against Mark Begich and decided to retract himself from the race. When you take a look at 2022, Bill Walker is now running again, and I would honestly say he probably can be considered to be a strong candidate across the electoral map, across the state of Alaska. So looking at 2018, strong candidates can absolutely return many of these states to be competitive and maybe introduce some more competitive states. For instance, we're going to be looking at states such as Arizona and Texas, states that have strong Democratic contenders running that might be able to take states that were double-digit victories for the GOP in 2018 and turn them into single-digit ones or potentially Democratic victories. So on this map here, we're going to be outlining the states that it is super important for the Democratic Party to run strong candidates, primarily speaking because they are going on the defense in this election. Democrats cannot expect to make major gains if they are not defending their own home territory, and it also is just as important to note that they need to be running strong candidates up and down the ballot no matter where they are, in the same way that Stacey Abrams and Democrats across states such as Texas made sure of doing in 2018 and 2020, because it is super important for your base to have someone they can vote for in confidence. Even if you know straight off the bat that your election will not be winnable, it is still important to contest the race. Leaving the race for the opposition party, in this case the Republican Party, tells voters in that area that you are already defeated. If it isn't understanding, I get it. You don't want to waste money, X, Y, and Z, and don't waste money. Don't raise $100 million for a Senate race that you know you simply won't win. But what you can do is field a candidate who is strong and try to at least change some minds. Try to at least build that group, build that ground game that can be utilized for a statewide election in the future. The same thing that happened in Georgia following Stacey Abrams' defeat in that governor race. So the key candidates to run, I think some of the obvious ones I've already mentioned. You have Stacey Abrams, who is actually starting off her tour across the nation and across Georgia, as many people expect her to announce her bid for governor. Georgia is absolutely a state in which Democrats are needing to 100% run a key candidate in order to actually win this race. They cannot expect or cannot give up this race too early on, even if they may expect, or even if we may see 2022 eventually evolve into a red wave year. It is so important that you can test the race because there actually might be some red wave surprises. We have had time periods in which Democrats have won Republican districts in red wave years and Republican states as something that defies all expectations. For instance, in 2018, the Republican Party expanded their majority in the Senate, despite Democrats winning the popular vote by 8%. Had they fielded lackluster candidates across all of those races, chances are Democrats would have won back control. But they were able to field strong ones, notable ones. You had Kevin Cramer from North Dakota, the sole representative. I mean, you had people that were recognizable that ultimately advanced the GOP's platform across the United States, which was obviously a major plus for them, even if 2018 wasn't at surface level the best year for them. So Georgia is absolutely one of those states. Beto O'Rourke in Texas is one of these candidates that I would consider to be a strong candidate for the state of Texas. I don't think that he's going to win this race, but I certainly think that he will offer some type of help for the Democratic Party, especially bringing his experience and his campaign rhetoric and tactics that were so well thought out in 2018 that nearly flipped a Senate race against Senator Ted Cruz. And another state across the Sun Belt is the state of Arizona. Now, first things first, I do want to say, I forgot to mention this, the reason why you might not see some of these more solid Democratic states or incumbent Democratic states have this characterization. Obviously, it is just as important for Democrats to run strong candidates in those races. I will fill that out later on with a different shade of yellow, the same characterization, but a different shade of yellow, just to indicate that these are incumbent states where it's sort of a given that you need to be playing on the defense here and needing to run the strongest candidates possible. Otherwise, you just end up losing races. What's the point of picking up Arizona, Texas, and Georgia if you're losing Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania? That's the question that people should be asking. But just understand that, yes, they are without a doubt states that key candidates need to run in these states, but it will just not be characterized until later on in the video. So far, what are we at? We are at 3 states that actually have had similar shifts towards the left over the past couple of election cycles. You can see from the 2004 election, in which I would say is probably the best year for the GOP on previous record. In the Sun Belt on previous record in the 21st century. But the shift from 2004 through 2020 is very similar across all 3 of these states. Georgia shifted by 17 points, Texas shifted by 17 points, and Arizona shifted by 11 points. These are states that have had monumental shifts towards the left, ultimately impacting the demographic groups here and making them more democratic and making the states themselves more democratic. Georgia and Arizona have not changed in terms of overall electoral count and are still much bluer than they had been in the past. And Texas is one of those states that we've seen a consistent and uniform shift, even if it may be 4 years behind. For instance, when you take a look at the 2012 versus 2016 shift, 3 states come out in the Sun Belt as surprising states that shifted towards the left: Georgia, Texas, and Arizona. California makes sense, Utah makes sense because of Evan McConnell, and Kansas slightly just because of the pushback and the pro-Ted Cruz population there. But regardless, Arizona, Texas, and Georgia, 3 states that became competitive in 2016 largely because of President Trump and largely because of the changing demographics that benefited the Democratic Party the most. Georgia shifted by 3 points, Arizona shifted by 6 points, and Texas shifted by 7 points. And then in time for the next election, 2016 versus 2020, Georgia shifted by 5, Texas shifted by 3, and Arizona shifted by 4, which puts Texas in this position where eventually it will come down to being very close and potentially within less than a percentage point, the same way Georgia and Arizona were. But we have to move beyond these 3 states, the holy trinity of the Sun Belt, as I would call them, and expand into a state that is in a similar region, the same region actually, that is the state of Florida. Now, looking at the Florida governor results in 2018, I'm sure many Democrats are pained to see this result. Knowing that they could have come so close to preventing Ron DeSantis from becoming president of the United States at some point in time in the future is something that they will have to deal with for the rest of their lives. Florida was a race that was winnable. I don't know if it was winnable by Gwen Graham or if it was winnable by only Andrew Gillum, but the point is, Democrats didn't win it. There was a possibility, there was that realm of possibility at least, that Democrats could have picked up this race. Rick Scott narrowly won in 2010 and 2014 despite them being overwhelmingly red wave years. In a blue wave year, Democrats simply couldn't change the results. In fact, the fact remains, Democrats have not won a statewide race in the state of Florida that was notable since 2012. The only one is if you want to take something that can be considered to be a victory for Democrats, but it's the Commissioner of Agriculture. Nothing important that I would say across the state that really is deemed to be this super monumentous victory for the Democratic Party, in which Nikki Fried defeated Matt Caldwell. But beyond that, looking at 2018, looking at 2016, 2014, the last time Democrats did well in Florida was in 2012, when Barack Obama won there, When Bill Nelson won there, both of them, presidential level and Senate level, flipped to the GOP. In fact, Florida has a Republican governor, a Republican state legislature, a majority Republican House of Delegation, House delegation in the United States House of Representatives, Republican victories on the presidential level. No matter where you look, Florida is red, even if the margin may be close in elections, which is why Democrats need to try to make inroads there, and they can only do that with strong candidates, which they arguably have. They arguably have strong candidates with Nikki Fried and Charlie Crist. The thing is, Ron DeSantis simply is a stronger candidate for the GOP. But I do think that Democrats should be at least somewhat optimistic. Not to a point where they should say, we are going to win this race, we are going to be plus ahead, whatever it is. I do think, though, that they should look at this and say, okay, looking at some of these new numbers, maybe Charlie Crist is the better nominee, and maybe he could actually win this race versus Nikki Fried, who doesn't seem to be doing too well overall. But of course, either of the two will likely come up short, as Florida is still Florida and still leans towards the right. But that does not mean that they should not run powerful candidates. And the next state that I would consider is the state of Alaska. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Why Alaska? Well, I showed you briefly earlier on in the state where you can see that Mike Dunleavy only defeated Mark Begich by around 7 points across the state. Around 7 points seems like a lot, but it's also Alaska, a state that Donald Trump had won 2 years prior by 14 points across the state, 15 points if we're rounding upwards. And then in 2020, it shifted 5 points towards the left, shifted by 4.6% in favor of the Democratic Party. So it certainly got closer, but not enough to a point where I would say Alaska is a swing state. But on the governor level, it does seem to be. And not necessarily Democrats, but independents have this candidate, Bill Walker, who actually won in 2014 in a red wave year. If you want to take a look at that election, it was won by a plurality here. Bill Walker won 48.1% of the vote against Sean Parnell, not the same one, running again in the state of Pennsylvania. But Bill Walker here won as an independent. In 2010, it actually went to the GOP by an overwhelming large margin. So in 2014, Bill Walker was able to defy expectations, benefit the Democratic Party. Then in 2018, Mark Begich came close to winning, but not close enough. He did not end up winning that race, and now Mike Dunleavy is running for re-election, and Bill Walker is running for governor in this state. So not necessarily Democrats in the state of Alaska, but they will absolutely throw their support behind him if he can gain heavy traction across the states itself. And so looking at this map, what we see here in terms of the Democratic Party running strong candidates, where else should they run strong candidates? Well, obviously Iowa and Ohio. These are two states that traditionally return to their competitive nature in midterm election years. In 2018, Kim Reynolds only defeated Fred Hubbell by 2.8%, another painful thing for the Democratic Party. Mike DeWine only defeated Richard Cordray by a margin of less than 4 percentage points. Ohio was competitive. Iowa was competitive. And Democrats can do it again. Another state where I think that they should run a strong candidate, the state of New Hampshire. Not necessarily the Vermont or Massachusetts, which already has, or Maryland, which has an already strong and powerful Democratic base, but New Hampshire, a state where Democrats actually might be losing the Senate race there. If they can find a governor candidate that is popular enough to drag along Maggie Hassan across the finish line, and I say that not to be at all trying to insinuate that Maggie Hassan is not a powerful candidate, because she defeated an electoral juggernaut in 2016. Even if it was by 0.1%, a victory is a victory. But I do think that if Chris Sununu is to run for that Senate election, he ends up in the positive. But if the governor candidate, or if the governor race itself goes over, it takes precedence over the Senate election, and Democrats have a strong candidate, you could absolutely see New Hampshire shift towards the Democratic Party in just the same way that we had seen presidential contenders drag across their candidates across the finish line, sometimes by narrow margins and sometimes by large margins. And the final state, or the final two states, I should argue, that the Democratic Party should be focusing on in terms of just potentially laying out the groundwork for a future election victory is maybe South Dakota and the state of South Carolina. I think that these are states that I'm a little bit more pushing away from in terms of the priority for the Democratic Party, but looking at the state's previous competitive nature, South Carolina decided by 8, South Dakota decided by less than 5, you could see, potentially speaking, with the right Democratic contender, not necessarily a Democratic victory, but maybe setting up for one in the future. I wouldn't say South Dakota and South Carolina at all rank above states such as Ohio, Iowa, Texas, Florida, Arizona, etc. in terms of priority, but certainly it should be a point of interest for the Democratic Party side. But for the sake of just keeping it down to what actually necessarily matters, I would keep it down to these 8 states. Then, of course, you can go into characterizing states such as Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. These are given. Minnesota, I mean, it is very important that these swing states retain their strong contenders. States such as California and Oregon, it really doesn't matter. The Democrat will win regardless. In the state of Maine, important as well. They already have them in Virginia. They already have them in the state of New Jersey. But beyond this, we really won't be seeing many competitive states. Some of these solid for the GOP, not really worth contesting for the Democratic Party to a point where we should say that they need a key candidate to run to lay out the groundwork. Many of these states already have the groundwork. Even if Charlie Baker may be the favorite as a Republican in Massachusetts, there's no necessary point in trying to make Massachusetts' governor race competitive if we already know that it's not going to be, and Democrats already have that groundwork. But if they can make improvements and change policy initiatives and change the way that people view certain issues, then yes, it is important. But for right now, I will say that there are 8 states in specific with Republican incumbents where Democrats can certainly lay out the groundwork for future victories or potentially win in 2022 as long as they have a strong candidate and they give people someone to fight for and someone to vote for that they will actually be inspired by instead of just giving up a race early on before the race has even begun. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.